Scarlett Blade. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Silent Night, Memoirs of a Royal Guard, Chapter 7. Yes, I knew she was writing fanfiction, Iridescent said to me and then asked, "What did you think she was doing all the time?" "Official business," I replied and paused to think about it. Plus, it doesn't seem like it was any of my business to pry into her tasks. Iridescence chuckled at me while we walked down the street. We were out in town on her day off. She does that too, but she has to have a life of her own. Writing is currently her outlet, and she is very good at it. That wasn't a shock to me. She's a princess, so of course she is, I said confidently. Iridescence bumped my flank with her own. No, she's good at it because she is good at it. Being a princess doesn't make you a good writer, nor would I say she is good just because she's a princess. That would hurt her feelings. Ponies are complicated. Iridescence saw my confusion and asked, "What would you say if I said you were good with a sword because you're a royal guard?" "Thank you." Which was clearly the wrong answer. No, not every royal guard is as good with a sword as you are. Didn't you learn to use yours before you were a guard? Isn't it a matter of pride that you learned enough to best your sister? Do you really want to boil it all down to the fact you're just a guard? The phrase bothered me. Just a guard. All I had ever wanted to be was just a guard. But when it was said that way, it seemed meaningless. Iridescence had a point. Princess Luna wasn't just a princess, and I barely learned anything about using a sword during my time at the Guard Academy. I was well beyond the other ponies due to the fact that my dad had trained me since I was a foal. This was a far different perspective than I had ever considered. It was a revelation, actually. All royal guards aren't the same. My cutie mark had a sword in it. Iridescence had a shield on hers. We did the same job, but we had different talents. I'm not sure why, but when Iridescence explained things, they made sense. How could I express that to her? "I see. Nailed it." "Good," she replied, looking around. She turned a corner and I followed. "I heard there is a new store in town, the File and Philly Alchemist shop. Sounds like a neat place. Why don't we check it out?" Nodding, I said, "That sounds good, but tell me one more thing. Princess Luna said she liked to write her fan fiction because some ponies complained because she didn't like to ship in it. What does that mean?" My unicorn companion looked over at me and asked, "Do you ever speak back to the princess, or do you just listen?" "She talks at me a lot," I said somewhat defensively. "Of course, you know you can ask questions if she's engaging you." Iridescence reminded me, shipping means forcing characters into a relationship. Say Princess Luna was writing a story about you and I, a fanfiction writer that writes a story about us too, and in that story they decided you and I would be very special some ponies, even if that wasn't the princess's intent. "That would be silly," I said. I'm not sure why, but Iridescence gave me a look, and it wasn't a good one. It was something like the look an opponent gives you before a sparring match. "Why would that be silly?" she asked. Finally, an easy question. We're partners. "You're a special some pony, Silent Night," she quipped, shaking her head. "Anyway, Princess Luna doesn't ship her original characters with any of the main characters the original authors write about. She only puts her in relationships with other original characters she wrote. Some of her fans don't like that." "Thanks, Celestia, for Iridescence. You're saying some pony writing a story might do something silly like have Princess Luna fall for me, and then we would become very special some ponies?" "Exactly," Iridescence said. "That wouldn't make any sense at all." I said cautiously and looked over at her. I got a nod. Finally, I was catching on. What sort of pony would ship me with the princess anyway? That would just be weird. After a little searching, we found the file in Philly Alchemist store. It had a big grand opening banner hung over the double doors, which were propped open, and the whole place was packed with ponies. Most of them were mares. Shopping is not a talent I possess. Iridescence, however, was a master, and I was becoming comfortable with being her pack horse. I carried the basket, and she filled it wherever we went. Frequently I wondered where she found all the bits to shop like she did. Royal guards didn't make a lot. In our usual fashion, I held the basket and walked behind her as she looked around. Iridescence took her time looking at the various potions and products. When we reached the section labeled Mare Care, she stopped and started levitating bottles. "Which one of these would you prefer I smelled like?" she asked, and started floating open potions by my nose. It was like an assault on my sense of smell. I've crawled through mud and muck. I've showered with a bunch of sweaty stallions. I even fell into a sewer once. Nothing ever smelled as intense as a bottle floating by. My vision went blurry, and I was certain I was going to faint when one particular scent went by. It was subtle and sweet and smelled like berries. "That one," I gasped before covering my nose with a hoof. The bottle levitated into the basket, and the rest went back on the shelf. I eyed them warily. I should check to see if these qualified as weapons, and inquire if the proprietor had a license for them. Iridescence picked out a few more things before we went to the counter. A gray Pegasus stallion with green eyes was waiting to ring us up. He was wearing some sort of green flat cap. I kept an eye on it, and I set the basket on the corner. Hats. "Thank you for coming today," the stallion said warmly. "I am Runic File, the proprietor. Did you find everything you needed?" "Almost everything," Iridescence said. "Would you happen to have any love potions?" Her tone was teasing, and she nodded in my direction while winking at Runic File. I nodded back. I'm not sure why. Runic File looked confused and nodded too. "Love potions. Romantic sense for your special sum pony." Shaking her head, Iridescence said, "No, real love potions, the kind that make a pony fall in love with you." She nodded back at me again. I looked at Runic File to me and back. I wasn't sure what we were doing, so I just nodded again. Runic File also nodded, clearly perplexed. He started ringing up Iridescence's purchases, and I said cheerfully, "I'm sorry, ma'am, those aren't something I can make. That will be 24 bits, please." I was still nodding. She wasn't, so I stopped. Iridescence paid and looked a little grumpy. I'd be grumpy too if I spent 24 bits on toxic potions. Runic File gave me the shopping bag, and I carried it out. "Don't worry, Iridescence," I said. "You won't need a potion to have a special sum pony. You're smart, beautiful, and kind. Any pony would be lucky to have you." That made her smile, and that made me happy. She leaned a little closer and asked, "Really?" I nodded and smiled back. "Yes, really. And I promise I'll help you find him." Well then, I hope you guys have had a wunderbar day. Peace off.